All right, hello everybody, our stalwart few. We're so happy to have you here. This is a project that we're really excited about sharing with you all. It's something that's very near and dear to us. And it's something that has been needed for a long time, and it's been in the works for a long time. So my co-presenter, Christina Gattone over there, she came on in January specifically to be our special projects librarian to help us drive this project. So this has been something that she's really kind of spearheading and pushing forward. And I want to thank her for that work, but I also want to thank the entire ROI team, including Danita, who's here today, because everybody has really participated in the building of this tutorial, and so it's become really collaborative, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But we're just excited about taking an opportunity to meet the needs of a population at UMass Boston that has a very demonstrable need. Hi, come on in. Yeah. So my name is Mary Moser. I'm the head of reference outreach instruction and public services at UMass Boston. And like I said, this is Christina Gattone, our special projects librarian. First, we want to remind you all, I've been the moderator in this room all day for the conference, so now I guess I'm moderating myself, which feels very meta. But we want to remind you all, if you tweet, we have a hashtag, so join the scholarly conversation. I've been on Twitter. There are at least 3 people tweeting today. It's very exciting. And so what is this that we're talking about? It's calling it an online tutorial, I think, does it a little bit of a disservice, because it's really more like a full online course. But it's meant to be a course that can either be taken and used as individual chapters, or a course that can be used as an entire whole. So it's meant to be very portable, very embeddable. It's meant to be standalone. It can be embedded in learning management systems. It can be sent as files to students, right? So there's a lot of different ways to go about this, and flexibility was really our main goal with this. We're building it out in Adobe Captivate, which is a platform we chose because it is a little bit more flexible than some of the other programs. It has a little bit more capability. And the why, I think, of this is really important. So I coordinate our teaching program at the library, right, which has always been our hallmark, and it's always been kind of the front-facing efforts of what we do. We teach students to use information and critically evaluate it. But we've always been very undergraduate focused. So about maybe 5% of the classes we teach every semester are taught to graduate students. So there's this whole graduate student population as UMass Boston grows into this very global, very research extensive population that we're hearing anecdotally and through the graduate students themselves. They don't really know what they're doing. And in their defense, how could they? You guys have seen our website, right? It's a mess. We have and the resources, there's so many of them, but how can you navigate them? So we knew there was this gap in graduate student abilities, but then we also know we have a lot of non-traditional students. We have a lot of distance students. How do we serve people who never set foot on this campus? How do we accommodate a variety of learning styles? And how can we, we don't want to replace our face-to-face services. We still place a high value on that, but how could we use technology to supplement what we do in the classroom? I think those are really important questions. So you can see on your handout, we've got some learning objectives listed, and we've got kind of 3 big picture learning objectives, and that's kind of what's driving this whole tutorial. That we want students to be able to, be critical information consumers, right? But if you look at this third one too, participate in scholarly discourse and manage original research. This kind of reaches outside the bounds of what people traditionally do in library instruction, and this is something that really excites us because when we looked back and thought about, the types of questions that graduate students ask us, sure, they'd be questions about doing literature reviews and citing sources, but we found that we got questions too about how do I create a poster for an academic conference, right? How do I publish my work online? These are all questions that it's really hard to draw a line between where the library stops and where someone else's job starts. And so this is meant to be a big picture thing. It's also reflecting a shift we're undergoing in the library profession. How many of you have heard of the information literacy standards? All the librarians in the room, hands held high proudly. Yes, we have these core sets of standards that we operate by in our profession that are now in the process of being revised very, very dramatically. And so the expansion of this tutorial reflects those changes in our professional standards as well, and that was important to us. So, having said all those things, I'm going to pass it over to Christina, who's going to talk a little bit about the why we decided to take these approaches.
Good afternoon. I'm Christina Gattone, and it's been my pleasure to be a part of the UMass community for for the last several months, and I'm looking forward to all that I'm going to get done in the next few months as well. I feel like online work, online resources, online services and tools, it's a very timely issue, but it's something that's been on the minds of library professionals and other scholars for quite a long time. I looked at a lot of literature that ranged from the late 90s until just a couple of months ago, and there were even some relevant issues from the late 90s that I think are still applicable to now. Where I want to start talking about the literature is where graduate students are. Graduate students are coming into their programs and they are self-identifying as not being prepared to do the research that's going to be expected of them. Moreover, if they're asked, what is it that you're missing? What is it that you don't understand? Which I think are two of the most oxymoronic questions in the history of the world. They also can't answer that as well. They can't point to where the gaps are in their knowledge and skills. And that's very concerning. Graduate students here, as at any university, are coming from various backgrounds. Some are coming from universities where they've had good preparation and research skills, and then that'll be coupled with some great coursework here as well. And that provides that sound foundation. Some of them will have very little. And then they might be coupled with some coursework here where they're not getting the same skills, maybe they're assumed of them. And that's really just kind of setting them up for failure, it feels like. And then perhaps most concerning of all, our future academics, future leaders of our industries and organizations and companies, they're leaving with a PhD after their name, but they're not prepared to do research in their fields. They recognize that, professors are recognizing that, faculty is recognizing that. Us as librarians, we're recognizing that in our conversations with faculty and with students. Some other things to keep in mind in terms of the students. I don't think it comes as much of a shock, those students who are particularly struggling with their research skills and knowledge right now, non-native English speakers. And I think this has to do almost as much with language as it might have to do with cultural differences in terms of accessing information, using it, what's considered ethical or standard and what's not. Master's level students and students in their first years. And that's doctoral and master's level students that often feel like coming in their first year, they're just trying not to drown and they've been thrown in the deep end of the pool. And the literature does indicate that after their first years, they start to feel more competent from year to year. But those master's level students that are here for only a year or two never quite feel like they catch up to where they need to be. Also, across different colleges, across different disciplines, students are now having very unequal experiences in terms of their exposure to research methods. There are also as many different kinds of graduate students as there are graduate programs. Some are here full-time and fully immersed. Some of them are here very part-time and are juggling family and job responsibilities. And I think that that also makes a difference in terms of what their exposure is because they're quite literally here or not here on a full-time or a part-time basis. Also, in terms of monetary support that students are getting, I feel like is somewhat tied in with research because so many students, or maybe not as many as we'd like, are on research stipends, which I think doubly benefits that student because they're getting that further exposure to research methods and then they're getting that funding that's so essential. Again, from discipline to discipline and from college to college, that's different for every student. So now we know where the students are. what kind of value is there in an online instruction? The literature tells us, and I think this is the most important point, that the learning outcomes for students are equal to that of face-to-face instruction. I think we would have been much more hesitant about undertaking this project if we would have discovered that learning outcomes were not as good. But also the instructional practices that are used within it are found to meet students of varying learning styles, abilities, and special needs. What's interesting is that student satisfaction is very mixed. I would have liked to have seen a trend, but it's very mixed. Some students have less than ideal experiences with online education. Some are equally satisfied with their online instruction as they are with face-to-face, and some even have a preference for it. That said, anecdotally, there are certainly expectations amongst students that more of their coursework and more of the work that they're expected to do is going to be done online. So the further value of it, I think accessibility is key in terms of the fact that this is something that's available 24/7, 365, here on campus on one of the library computers, at home in your jammies, or halfway around the world. This is something that's accessible. Its multimedia status, I think, provides a lot of value. Somewhere in the literature I read something, and I believe verbatim, it was the fact that when there are certain multimedia rules that are followed, then students are able to do what they need to, identify their needs, learn, and not have the sort of cognitive load that sometimes I'm sure we've all experienced when we use less than ideal tech tools. So the status meets students' learning styles. Again, it reduces that cognitive load, but it allows for deeper thinking. We're certainly making this a tool so that a student is not going to sit in front of it and be on Facebook or email, and they're just kind of listening to this. We want this to be something that they're actively engaging in. Also, I don't know that there's any university today that's not struggling with shortages in resources, money, time, and personnel. Apparently, even at Harvard, you can't get cookies at the faculty meetings anymore. That's how rough times are there too. These are tools that are also becoming increasingly user-friendly. So what are the best practices that we want to use, that we want to incorporate into our tool, because we know that it's something that inherently has value? Clear learning objectives and standards. We're not going about this willy-nilly. We've done a lot to figure out, to identify where those gaps in skills are for students. As Mary mentioned, our professional association is also continuously putting out standards to really provide a lot of rigor in the kind of work that our students are doing. The use of visual and audio elements, I think, has a lot to do with learning style. Some of us are visual learners, some of us are audio learners. And that's not to say that when we're exposed to both, that we learn twice as much. But even those visual learners get a lot when they can hear something and match it with what they're seeing. Again, this is something that we want students to be actively engaging with and not just sort of half listening to. So it is interactive. There are hyperlinks to further resources. There are going to be interactive type opportunities as well, like evaluation and assessment. It was interesting to me. I thought, at best, students would be indifferent to the fact that they are being evaluated while they're using a tool like this. We as instructors know how important assessment is, but I'm not always sure that the students do, but students prefer the evaluations. Especially in a multimedia online tool, they get instant feedback, and that's of great value to them. So there we go, I got ahead of myself. That instantaneous feedback is certainly something that we're building into our program. As is visual cueing, we want to lessen that cognitive load on our students and assist them as much as we can as they navigate and go through the tutorial at their own pace. We're making this so it's possible that it can be moved through linearly or in a sort of choose your own adventure type style. What has been really valuable to me as a person that's been driving this project is that it's very much so been a collaborative project. I have really fabulous coworkers, and I've gotten so much from them, and I think this is going to be a valuable tool for that.
All right. So now you guys have heard a little bit about why we're doing what we're doing. I don't think any of that will come as much of a surprise, but it's nice to see that other people are struggling with the same questions and issues that we are. So when we started with this project, right, we wanted to follow a good instructional design approach to this. So we really started with our needs analysis. And this has been the most important step. It's always also been the most challenging. So if you look on your handout in that gray box, I give you my contact information and a hopefully not as desperate as I think it sounds call for participation. But we really want to get diverse perspectives involved in this. And so we've done a little bit already. We had a focus group with a class of graduate students. We've been talking to the graduate program directors. We've been meeting with the Graduate Writing Center. We've been having conversations with them. We also have a lot of our own informal experiences with graduate students that we've been pulling from, as well as we keep a lot of in-depth reference statistics. So we've been able to go back and look at reference questions that graduate students have asked. But that being said, there's always room for more input, right? We want this to, we've got our own blinders on, and we want people to help us see beyond those. So we went from the needs analysis to the storyboarding, right? And I picked this slide specifically to show it's got handwritten stuff, there's a post-it note, there's whiteout, right? It was kind of a very like paper and pen approach to begin with. And I think this is a really important thing to showcase because there have been a couple other mentions in the other sessions I've been to about like paper as technology, right? I think it's important when we think about technology to also know that paper is a kind of technology. And so this was kind of the process that we went through. There were index cards and they were shuffled around. But it gave us a lot of flexibility up front to really make sure we were on a right path before we got too deep into the design, which was important to us. And so you can see here's the ADDIE model that we've been doing. So we started with the analysis and the design. Right now we're smack in the middle of the development, and then we're hoping later for the implementation and the evaluation. But that means there's still plenty of time to collect feedback, to talk to people. But the development part is the exciting part. That's when you start taking all this hard work and knitting it together. And so you guys are going to get to see a piece of that in a minute that we're really proud to share. So this content, right, you can see from the handout, there's a lot that we want to do with this. It's very ambitious. And so we didn't frame it as a library research tutorial. And I think that's really important to emphasize, that what we're teaching them is not just how to search a database or how to use a library catalog. We kind of played with a few different approaches, and we came up with the idea of we want to teach graduate students how to enter a scholarly community, how to participate in scholarly academic discourse. And research is a huge part of that, but so is what you do with that research, how you create new knowledge, how you publish it, how you share it. So that's really kind of how we're framing this, that we're teaching them how to enter a scholarly community. What are the rules of those communities? What are the conventions? And so there are kind of three main chapters, and you can see those, I think they're on the other side of the handout. Yeah, so there's a little outline. Joining a scholarly discussion, research and writing, and that's where the kind of library piece will be embedded, and intellectual property, where we talk about copyright and citing your sources and all of that stuff that's really fun to us and not so much fun to other people. Like Christina said, we're building in opportunities for assessment because we want students to have those opportunities for knowledge checks. And so I'd say take a minute to review the entire content outline, but you've probably already been doing that. We just want to give you an idea of the scope that we're dealing with, that it's really not just something that belongs to the library, and that's really important for us. All right, so I'm going to introduce this a little bit, and then on all of the computers there are headsets, and we have a piece of the tutorial ready to go. So this is just one piece. This is something that's been in development the past couple weeks, and it is still very rough. This is not the final version by any means, but it's just something to give you an idea of where we're going. So this one piece, creating an academic web presence, right? That's under the first section, joining a scholarly discussion, right? Is that what it's called? Okay, yeah, joining a scholarly discussion. So we've just got one chapter there on creating an academic web presence, which includes the pros and cons of putting scholarship on the web, as well as blogging and microblogging, and how that fits into this whole picture. So we identified 2 specific learning objectives for this module. We want students to be able to debate the benefits of putting their scholarship online, and also describe the role of these Web 2.0 tools in scholarly communication. So with that being said, we want you all to put on your learner hats, and in this case, your learner headsets. Go ahead and find a computer in the room. I think any of them work. And go through the tutorial at your own pace. You can take notes, you can not take notes, but think about what it's like as a learner to go through this tutorial. Okay, so we're going to get back into it. I'm going to actually jump out of order just a little bit to tell you what our next steps are, since you just saw it. So the reason the PowerPoint looks so spare is because Creative Services is in the process of developing a custom PowerPoint template. So we asked them to develop something for this project that's visually engaging, maybe looks a little bit edgier than the swoop, which is lovely, but also something that would be easier to print out, because that's one thing we want to think about too in terms of accessibility, in terms of availability to technology. We are in the process of enlisting expert perspectives to help us build these pieces out too, right? We said this is a collaborative effort. We recognize we don't necessarily have all this expertise, and we have our own set of blinders. So we're going to be pulling in expert perspectives like Camille and like Cynthia to help us make sure, and like Ella would be a great resource too, to help us make sure that we're really reaching beyond the confines of our own knowledge domains. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're as accessible as possible too. So we are going to be building out closed captioning for the final version. It is very time intensive, so we want to make sure we have the final version before we build out the captioning. And then also doing full testing for 508 compliance. So we know Captivate is 508 compliant, but we also want to make sure it's as flexible as possible with screen readers for hearing impaired, for visual impaired learners. Theoretically, this is going to be built out by the end of May. That is our very ambitious goal. I think we can accomplish it. And then we'll be enlisting some graduate students who are on campus this summer to be a test group. Robin Hannigan from the EEOS is really interested in working with us, but if you have groups of graduate students that you'd be interested this summer or beyond too, let us know. And then theoretically, we do some edits and some tweaks, and we have it ready to roll out for the fall semester as a more formalized curriculum. So I wanted to give you some idea of our next steps. What you saw are just the very beginning baby steps. That's the very first piece we've built out. But now I'm going to just start this off and then hand it over to Christina. First, we wanted to get your idea from a perspective of learners, right? You can look at these questions. What did you learn? Was there anything new in here? But also, how did it feel to go through this type of process? Do you think it's effective? And then we can kind of go from there. So we'll start first with questions from the perspective of a learner, and then the next group of questions we'll deal with are from the perspective of people who work with graduate students. So we're going to try to hit different perspectives in our discussion. So take it away. Anybody have any feedback? You can respond to these questions, you can respond to other questions, you can offer your input. We don't have to go through these line by line.
I thought a lot of it was pretty good, and I sort of liked the logical approach that was taken, and maybe that's because I'm very certainly. What I would appreciate is some examples. You know, because you were talking a lot about a good blog versus a poor blog, good presentation, poor presentation. I think it would be very helpful to see an example of a good one and an example of a weak one. Not that you're learning how to do it at that point, but you know, sort of highlighting what makes this one good, what makes this one weak, or whatever, in both in terms of the blog and Twitter. I think you're sort of assuming that most, I'm sorry, should I be talking? I think you're assuming that, and maybe that's a good thing to assume, is that all the grad students know what Twitter is and how it works and all that kind of stuff. I think it would be very useful to see a scholarly Twitter comment and maybe a couple of others, you know, just because I think,
chat or something.
yeah, because we're all used to seeing, you pop sort of tweets. And you indicate that, and that this is a different way of doing it, but I think it would be useful to actually see that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and putting an example of maybe the tweets from humanities having a conversation about, and there were different kinds that said you could do it for getting help or for half-baked ideas. I can't remember some of the other, but so there could be different samples too. I wonder how you control. This is just a question which you probably can't control, but I noticed, like me, when I control myself, but I wanted to go off into the links, and then I wonder, like, which the links are good, and it's probably not a bad thing, but I was just laughing because I was thinking, oh me, I'd probably get off and forget that I was like in the tutorial. But I guess, it's too bad you can have some alarm, like, hey, remember me. Like it would tweet, with the bell would go off, like, hey, come back.
You're still in the tutorial.
But I guess, which is also, I guess, also why I think it is good for the assessment, because you do remember, like, oh yeah, this is great, so you probably go back and like look through it more carefully if it's not track.
Things that were blue and underlined, like often you would sometimes mention things that you could click on them and go off, but couldn't, so I don't know.
Are they not all clickable? They should
tried.
all be.
Actually, I think what happened, it was very weird. If you clicked on it the first time, it actually advanced you to the next slide. But if you went back and clicked on it, it would go to the link. Because I thought it was odd too. I was like, oh, these are fake links. And then I went back and they do work.
They're all supposed to be fully functional, so that's something for us to test.
But I don't, yeah, I mean, at least that was the experience I had on the first one. I don't know.
Maybe your examples, as I say, good or regular, could be done through links. Just have it, here's an example of a weak blog or whatever, or one that we don't think is,
Yeah, I wasn't.
and then just, and then just have a link, and put a link to it so that people can see it. And then you see in the assessment too, you could probably do that. You could probably put up a blog and then ask people to comment on it, And what would be really cool actually is if you could put up maybe a Twitter chat or something of a real hot issue too. Ask them to participate in it. Yes. Yeah. Well, no, of some real, discussion or a blog, an example of a blog discussion that's very intense, where people, to find an issue like that, to show that it really, to me, a blog is really a discussion tool. That's really.
Along this line, it would be interesting to have Twitter set up so that people could get feedback right while they're on the site. It would be a way for you to keep building. Oh, I would like to see this here. Oh, I actually saw a clip that demonstrated how this worked for people outside of the technology. It would be a way really to reach it. One of the things I was thinking as I was watching it was, and people have alluded to this and talked about it, is bringing in different forms of media so that there may be, again, a YouTube clip of something, even doing a short filming of a couple of people working together, collaborating with the tool, just to break it up, but also to again reach out to people with different learning styles. And that's very complex, and it takes you, I know, down the road here. But
No, but we'd even thought about interviewing Camille about, what's the best way to, apply to a scholarly conference or something and have a video of Camille speaking so that there's that variety. Just volunteer you.
Yeah, it makes me think of that book that we just got in, presentation. There was very good. But then the other question comes to mind is like, how long was it? Because I was, when I was thinking, oh, we want all this extra, but that was only 3 questions, and then, all of that. So.
It's going to be long. I mean, the whole course together could be an hour and a half, 2 hours,
Yeah.
And so that's why maybe you take pieces or
As soon
maybe
as
you
you can take it in parts, right?
you wouldn't have to do the whole thing all at once or the whole thing at all. Maybe you just want to like I said, we've kind of been bleeding into this a little bit, but.
Well, I have no graduate students because I don't teach graduate, but I sit on the graduate studies committee, and these topics, as you know, come up all the time. And it seems like every graduate program, and this was one question I had, is every graduate program, from master's levels to PhD, seems to have its own discrete research methods course. And sometimes the thought has come up in the discussion, isn't there some sort of commonality that we have across the campus? But apparently not. So one question I have is or one comment that is often made is, and that you see people trying to emphasize in these classes, is the ability to distinguish primary scholarly research versus your Twitters and your blogs and your other print literature, or online journal literature. And a lot of the courses that they put out, try to make a big deal of, or they do make a big deal about being able to distinguish between those kinds of articles and information. So I assume there will be a section, I'm sure there usually is. I mean, the parents will always make a big deal about it, but I think it's sometimes hard for students who have never been exposed to that differentiation to do, and I don't know if you sort of have practices. In the old days, there used to be some tutorials where we put up all kinds of different articles, just the first page and abstract, and people were supposed to classify them.
Right. Well, I don't know if that's fully entered into our planning, because I think that question that we started with was what differentiates undergraduate research from graduate research, and theoretically that's a skill they were supposed to learn in undergraduate. But if you're saying that they're coming here and they're not knowing that, then that's definitely something we should revisit. So that's the explanation for why it wasn't on that list originally. But I think it's worth remembering that our students come from diverse backgrounds with different levels of preparation, and one student may have gotten prepared with an undergrad, another student didn't. And so many of our students have been out of school for so long.
I think that's the
that makes a big
an
difference.
interruption.
Especially as it stands next to the text, students have a very difficult time figuring out how to use the text to work with the data. If the structure of the data is something that they've never encountered before, and there are tools to do that with looking at the text and using that text to figure out what's going on. I don't know if that's something that.
Well, no, and I'm thinking, this is really starting to blur the lines, but in a good way, and I think part of what we're seeing is there's so much intersection with what Office of Faculty Development does, with what the Graduate Writing Center does, so that's why we need to bring these perspectives in, so I think it's a great idea. Who else has questions, comments, thoughts, graduate students? Do you all think this is an effective way to meet the needs that we're seeing? You're not going to hurt our feelings.
Especially if, I don't know if you plan, I was looking at the
that's what I think it was the faculty library committee kind of talked about. They're like, well, all graduate students have to go through this online training to do human subject research or research ethics, and they wanted to do that with research too. Period. So.
Given to the graduate population, well, some of them are online students. The other students who have such busy lives with work, family, etc., this is a great vehicle for them. I think too it builds on our university's development of external support systems for students that really don't exist at this point to the degree that they should. I think with online tutoring we will find this really valuable by being able to point the students to a library and have them start to think about online work as involving the same kind of components that they would encounter in the actual face-to-face university. So that seems like it would be great.
Well, and I also think it could be used as a support, not only for the students, but for the faculty that are, as they say, apparently teaching all of these research methods courses. You know, if certain concepts, I mean, not that it's nice that it's in segments, because maybe certain concepts they could use just the tutorial and then deal with questions that may have come up after somebody did it or something like that, and then concentrate more on what they want, you know, what they felt was important for their particular discipline. I think it could work that way as well, and maybe you would get suggestions from them as well as to, you know, what they would like to see added.
This is a different concept they were struggling with. They're basically saying that at their university undergrad, the experience that they had and where they did their PhDs, that a lot of students had already had that experience, and then they came here and they were just they felt like they weren't prepared. They didn't have all the tools that they needed to help the students as much, and so I think today would be a tool as well for faculty. And I think some questions like you don't want to ask these kinds of questions. I remember being in grad school, and I just felt like everybody must already know this. I had gone back to grad school and I'd been out for a longer time, and I didn't want to ask some of these basic questions. What's microblogging? I wouldn't have wanted to ask that class. I would have said that the whole time. I have no idea what. Well, the funny thing is I knew Twitter, but I didn't know it was called microblogging. So I mean, I thought I had to do this. But anyway, they're kind of questions in some ways you might, I don't know, online gives you a little bit of confidence and skill building, and then you can go back into class and be more confident to kind of talk about some of these issues.
Factors safety and anonymity.
Right.
Is there a function where they can ask questions? I mean, as they go through, they actually have, because then we can pick up the anonymity, and then if they really didn't understand something, you know, I don't even know what Twitter is. Where do I find someone that if there was a place for them to make that comment, that someone would respond to it?
Yeah.
Almost like a live answer kind of
Well, that's-
invention
yeah,
or
that's-
something
yeah.
like that. You know.
That's what I was even thinking. We just link live answers and then they have questions about
I mean, you
any
may
of
not
this.
get many of them, but it would
Yeah.
give them an opportunity, and they could preserve their
Yeah, well, that's true. But also give them an outlet to ask more questions.
Exactly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Great idea. Thank you. But oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
One thing you might consider is throwing on some technical tutorials on there.
Oh, yeah.
So, for example, I work in the Graduate Research Center,
Okay.
which is a lab for faculty, staff, and graduate students. And we have a full-time statistician, but she's primarily set for assisting faculty and the staff in the institutes and things like that. Now, she does have a graduate assistant now to help the students here, but and we do have workshops on SAS and SPSS and STATA. But what I found, and I think what a lot of the faculty, one of the things that they don't have time for, you asked that,
Yes.
is showing them how to use that software. That's what they don't want to do it.
Yeah, right.
They want to move that up. But what I find is a lot of students don't want to block off 2 hours of the time for these workshops, if they even have the ability to make those time-wise. So perhaps some little tutorials on SPSS, SAS, Stata, some of the just to show, well, if you're looking to do this type of analysis, this is the tool you want, things like that.
Could we come talk to you?
Sure, I mean,
that module?
I assist students up there, but quite often they're looking for the stats, and I'm like, tell them,
Yeah,
okay,
right.
you know what, I'm not a statistician, so I don't know if I'll be able to help you. If it's software, I might be able to, but sometimes, you know, just by what they're describing and just looking at it and making sense, well, I don't think that is even, you're even gonna be able to graph that with this here. Do you have other data? So, oh, well, look, this sheet right here. Well, maybe I helped somebody last week doing that, and I'm not a statistician, but I helped him on his way. But I think these kinds of things might be useful to them.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Cynthia brings up the data visualization too. You know, I think this whole thing about data and statistics, like there's a big piece here that we might be able to work on too. There's so much, I mean, can't we just cover the whole knowledge of human history, really?
But in a sense, too, it could be used to connect parts of the university here, with this particular kind of information, maybe
Yeah, even something like that, you know, letting them know that there is a statistician.
Yeah, right. So really almost like it's,
There is a grad assistant.
yeah, like directing them to resources. Really, like, here's a quick introduction and then here are resources that can help you.
And even if you were just pointing them to some online tutorials
Yeah.
that are already out there.
But they're good. And,
Texas had some great ones. They're out there.
yeah.
Yeah, you don't even have to create them.
Yeah. Well, and one thing we're looking at, you know, one thing we want to keep in mind is that we're hoping this will eventually be used beyond UMass Boston. You know, we want this to be potentially a resource for any graduate student. And so, you know, if we think about finding tutorials on YouTube versus finding tutorials in Atomic Learning, you know, which is locked behind the firewall. I think what we're thinking about is how do we make this as universal as possible. So that's going out and finding those tutorials could be really useful. So obviously we've got some tech troubleshooting to do in terms of the quizzes. We're going to work with IT to figure out audio improvements. If we're not multimedia specialists, so we want to reach out to the people who are and make sure we're making the best use of our resources. So this is still a very rough draft, but your feedback is so critical as we start building this out moving forward. So share this with your colleagues. Tell them about it if you know somebody who might be interested. We welcome feedback. We welcome focus groups. We welcome pilot groups. We really want this. We welcome experts to come give us their expert opinions about the type of content we need to develop. So any and all of that is very welcome in this project moving forward.
One thing that you might think about, just a thought, is talking with the theater departments to see if somebody would volunteer speaking there, just so that you get all the perfect inflections and
Right,
things
the
like
voice
that.
actors.
I thought of that because I stumbled across some really, really high quality technical training.
Yep.
And that are free on YouTube, but their model is they hire professional actors, and so the techies do the script. And
Right.
usually the way we learn as techies is we listen to boring techies talk their stuff there. But they took that and they said, let the techies do the script, but then give it to an actor to do out, and it's a world of a difference too.
Absolutely. That's great.
So it's just a thought.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that too. Christina, is there anything you'd like to say to wrap it up, or questions you want to leave us with?
Thank you. I feel like I've gotten just so much, so my brain's racing with ways to hopefully improve this. So please do be in touch with either Mary or me. I want to know what you think. I have a pretty thick skin, so if there were some real concerns, please let me know. would like to be the kind of person that could do something like this all on my own and have it be amazing, but it really does take a village.